Hash. The divorce papers were barely dry when I signed the mortgage on my new home. After 3 years of emotional devastation and slowly rebuilding my sense of self, I finally had a place that was just mine. No shared spaces, no compromises, no memories of a failed marriage lingering in every corner, just peace and quiet in a suburban neighborhood that promised tranquility. The selling point had been the backyard. While the house itself was modest, the previous owners had installed an in-ground pool surrounded by beautiful landscaping. I had saved for 7 years to afford a place like this. Every extra shift, every bonus, every penny pinched, all for this moment. The day I moved in, I stood at the edge of that crystal blue water and felt something I had not felt in years: pride. This was mine, all mine. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. I spent my evenings floating in the pool, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was exactly the fresh start I had dreamed about. But then I started noticing the eyes. Neighbors would pause a little too long when walking past my fence. Children would press their faces between the slats, watching me swim. And then there was Karen. She lived 2 houses down in a property larger than mine but without the coveted pool. I first noticed her standing at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, staring at my backyard with an expression that made me uncomfortable. Not friendly curiosity, not neighborly interest, something possessive, something entitled. 3 days after I moved in, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Karen standing there, perfectly styled blonde hair framing a face that was trying too hard to look pleasant. Her eyes immediately looked past me, searching for a glimpse of the backyard. "Hello, neighbor," she said, her voice artificially sweet but with an edge that grated like sandpaper. "I am Karen Westfield, the Community Welcome Coordinator." I introduced myself politely, expecting the typical welcome basket or neighborhood information packet. Instead, she immediately launched into criticism. "Your fence is not regulation height," she declared, gesturing to my backyard. "And those bushes are invasive species. The HOA will have something to say about that." Before I could respond, she continued, "This street has always been very community-oriented. We share resources. We look out for one another." Her eyes drifted again toward my pool. "That pool must be so much work for just one person." The implication hung in the air between us. I smiled tightly and assured her I could manage. She laughed as if I had said something foolish. "Well, on this street we believe good fences do not make good neighbors. Quite the opposite. You will see how things work around here." She turned to leave, then added over her shoulder, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I hope you fit in better than the last owner." That night I checked my property deed and HOA regulations. My fence was completely up to code. The plants were not invasive. They were native species recommended by the county extension office. I could not shake the feeling that Karen's welcome had been more of a reconnaissance mission. The next day, I installed additional private property signs and checked that my security cameras were functioning properly. The rest of the neighborhood seemed normal enough. Families with children, retired couples walking dogs, young professionals heading to work each morning. But every time I encountered Karen, she made odd comments that set my nerves on edge. "Such a lovely day for swimming," she would call across the street, even when the sky was cloudy. "My children love pools. Such a shame to see one sitting empty all day while people are at work." I began swimming early in the mornings or late in the evenings, avoiding the middle of the day when Karen seemed most likely to be watching. I told myself I was being paranoid, that no adult would seriously believe they had rights to use a stranger's private pool. I was wrong, so very wrong. It happened on a Saturday in late June. I had worked late the night before and slept in past my usual early morning swim. The sound that woke me was not my alarm but splashing, the unmistakable sound of bodies hitting water followed by laughter and shouts. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then clarity hit me like ice water. Someone was in my pool. I threw on clothes and rushed downstairs, heart pounding against my ribs. When I flung open the back door, the scene before me was so bizarre that I froze in disbelief. Karen was stretched out on my lounge chair, sunglasses perched on her nose, drinking from a soda can as if she were at a resort. Her two teenage children, a boy and girl who appeared to be around 14 and 16, were playing with pool floats in my water, in my private backyard. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of shock and rage. Karen lifted her sunglasses casually and looked at me as if I had interrupted her at her own home. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Beautiful day, is it not?" "You are trespassing," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "This is private property. You need to leave right now." She actually laughed, and took another sip from her can. "The gate was open. We just thought we would take a quick dip. No harm done." "The gate was not open," I stated firmly. "And even if it had been, that does not give you permission to enter my property or use my pool." Her children had stopped splashing and were watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Karen sighed dramatically and sat up. "It is just water," she said dismissively. "Do you know how hot it has been? The community pool is closed for repairs and the kids needed to cool off. You are gone all day anyway. What is the big deal?" "The big deal is that this is my property," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "I did not give you permission to be here. You need to leave now or I will call the police." Karen's expression hardened, the friendly facade dropping completely. She stood up slowly, gathering her towel and bag. "Come on, kids," she called. "Our neighbor does not understand how things work around here yet." The teenagers climbed out, dripping water all over my deck. Neither looked embarrassed. In fact, the boy gave me a defiant glare as he passed. Karen took her time collecting their things, acting as if she were doing me a favor by leaving. At the gate, she turned back. "You will not last long with that attitude," she said, her voice now cold. "This neighborhood takes care of its own. Those who do not share do not belong." After they left, I immediately checked my security cameras. The footage was clear. Karen had approached my locked gate with what appeared to be a thin metal tool. She had carefully reached through the slats and manipulated the latch from the outside. This was not opportunistic trespassing. This was premeditated invasion. I was shaking as I compiled the footage and drafted an email to the HOA. The response came hours later, brief and dismissive. "The HOA cannot get involved in personal disputes between neighbors. We suggest you attempt to resolve this amicably." Amicably, she had broken into my property, used my pool without permission, threatened me. What exactly was I supposed to resolve amicably? That night, I reinforced my gate with an additional lock and ordered signs that explicitly stated no trespassing and private property violators will be prosecuted. I now understood what I was dealing with. Karen did not see boundaries. She saw challenges, and she had decided that my pool, my sanctuary, was something she felt entitled to use. I had moved here for peace. Instead, I had found myself in a territorial war I never asked for, and it was only the beginning. By the following week, I realized Karen was not content with simply being blocked from my pool. She had launched a full campaign against me. It started with whispers. I would catch fragments of conversations that stopped when I approached. Neighbors who had previously waved now avoided eye contact. The HOA citation arrived on Tuesday, a formal letter claiming I had made unauthorized fencing modifications that violated community standards. The specific violation: the additional lock I had installed to keep Karen out. The fine was $300. I contested it immediately, attaching the security footage of Karen's trespassing as justification for the additional security measure. The response was another form letter. All modifications must be pre-approved regardless of circumstance. Then Karen's car began appearing in front of my house, parked just close enough to my driveway to make leaving difficult but not technically blocking it. When I confronted her, she feigned confusion. "This is a public street," she said with exaggerated innocence. "I can park where I want." She would leave the car there for hours, moving it just before I could reasonably call a tow truck. The trash came next. Every few days I would find pool toys, empty soda cans, or food wrappers tossed over my fence. When I installed additional cameras that caught Karen's children in the act, they claimed it was accidental. "Oops," the teenage boy called when I confronted him after watching him deliberately throw an empty chip bag over my fence. "The wind must have caught it." There was never any wind. I documented everything, every trespass attempt, every parking incident, every piece of trash. I filed weekly reports with the HOA, attaching time-stamped photos and video clips. Their responses grew increasingly dismissive. Then came the second citation, this one for creating a hostile environment through excessive surveillance. According to the HOA, my security cameras were making other residents uncomfortable. The fine was $500. That evening I spotted Karen at the community mailbox. She smiled at me, saccharine sweet, and asked, "How are you settling in? Having any problems with the HOA?" I knew then that she had connections. This was not random. This was targeted harassment, and someone on the HOA board was helping her. I began researching neighborhood social media groups and discovered Karen was actively posting about me. She described me as unstable, paranoid, and aggressive toward children. She claimed I had installed cameras specifically to spy on her family. She painted herself as the concerned neighbor while portraying me as the neighborhood menace. When I tried to defend myself online, my comments were deleted by the group administrator. When I approached other neighbors to explain the situation, they seemed uncomfortable and made excuses to end the conversation. I was being systematically isolated. The community that I had hoped would provide peace was now a battlefield where I stood alone against an opponent who knew the terrain and had allies in positions of power. I felt the walls closing in. Every day brought a new slight, a new violation, a new attempt to make me break. The police were no help. Each incident individually was too minor to warrant intervention. Neighbor disputes, they called it, as if this were a disagreement about noise levels or overhanging tree branches rather than systematic harassment. I began to wonder if Karen was right. Maybe I would not last. Maybe this was their neighborhood, not mine. But then I remembered how hard I had worked for this house, for this pool, for this fresh start. And something hardened inside me. I was not going to be driven out. Not by Karen, not by the HOA, not by anyone. The next day, I hired a security consultant to upgrade my entire system. I installed motion sensors, improved lighting, and added cameras with better resolution. I started a detailed log of every interaction, every violation, every suspicious occurrence. If no one would take me seriously individually, perhaps the pattern would speak for itself. Karen had declared war on my peace. She did not know it yet, but I was preparing to fight back. The confrontation happened on a quiet Sunday morning in July. I had been keeping a sporadic schedule, never establishing a routine that Karen could predict. That morning, I woke before dawn and went for a run, returning just as the sun was rising. As I approached my house, something caught my eye: movement near my back gate. I slowed my pace and quietly circled around through my neighbor's side yard, the friendly retired couple who had been sympathetic to my situation. There she was, Karen, crouched by my gate, a towel in one hand and what appeared to be a spray can in the other. She was methodically covering the lens of my security camera with some kind of fabric or paper. I watched, fury and vindication mingling in my chest. I took out my phone and began recording. "What exactly are you doing to my camera, Karen?" I called out, my voice cutting through the morning quiet. She jumped, spinning around with the startled look of someone caught in the act. For a split second, genuine fear flashed across her face. Then it hardened into defiance. "Your cameras are invasive," she snapped. "They point at public spaces. That is illegal surveillance." "My cameras point at my property," I replied calmly, continuing to record. "What is illegal is you trespassing and tampering with my security equipment. This is the third time you have been on my property without permission." She stepped toward me, her face contorting with anger. "You do not belong here," she hissed. "This neighborhood worked perfectly before you came with your rules and your cameras and your attitude." "You mean before I stopped you from using my pool without permission?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "It is just a pool," she shouted, her composure cracking. "No one used it for months before you moved in. The Hendersons always let the neighborhood children swim. It was practically a community resource." "The Hendersons moved," I said firmly. "And this is my property now. I am calling the police." That was when she lunged at me, trying to knock the phone from my hand. I stepped back, maintaining my grip on the device. "Do not touch me," I warned. "You are already trespassing and vandalizing. Do not add assault." "Call them," she screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that carried down the street. "Go ahead, see who they believe. I have lived here for 15 years. No one will take your side." Her shouting had the desired effect. Doors opened. Neighbors emerged onto their porches and lawns, watching the confrontation with wary expressions. Karen immediately changed tactics. Her face crumpled, tears appearing as if someone had flipped a switch. "Please," she cried, her voice now trembling. "I just asked why she was filming our children. Our kids were just playing in their own yards and she has cameras pointed at them." I stood in shocked silence at the complete fabrication, but Karen was not finished. "She attacked me," she sobbed, pointing at me while addressing the gathering neighbors. "I was just walking by and she came out screaming. She shoved me." I held up my phone. "I have been recording this entire encounter," I said loudly, addressing both Karen and the audience she had gathered. "And my security cameras have footage of her tampering with my property." Karen's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her own phone and dialed 911, turning away from me to report, in a shaking voice, that she had been assaulted by a neighbor. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else than mediating a neighborhood dispute on a Sunday morning. Karen immediately approached them, tears flowing freely now, explaining how I had threatened her and how my cameras were invading her privacy. One officer took her statement while the other approached me. I calmly explained that I had caught her tampering with my security equipment and offered to show him both my cell phone recording and the security footage. "Let us see what you have," he said, professional but clearly skeptical. I pulled up the footage on my phone first, showing Karen approaching my gate with clear intent, the spray can and towel visible in her hands. Then I logged into my security system and showed the officer footage from the past few weeks. Karen's repeated approaches to my property, her children throwing trash over the fence, her careful manipulation of the gate lock during the pool incident. I have filed multiple reports with the HOA, I explained, and I contacted the non-emergency police line twice. No one has taken this seriously because each incident seems minor in isolation. The officer's expression changed as he watched the pattern unfold on screen. He called his partner over, and they reviewed the footage together. Karen's crying stopped abruptly when she realized what they were watching. Her face flushed red, and she began to stammer explanations about misunderstandings and neighborhood customs. The first officer turned to her. "Ma'am, the video clearly shows you trespassing and attempting to damage private property. Your version of events does not match the evidence." "But the cameras," she began, "are on private property and directed at private property," the officer interrupted, "which you were trespassing on." They took formal statements from both of us. Karen's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a simmering rage that she barely contained while speaking to the officers. "You have two options," the officer told her. "You can leave now with a warning for trespassing and vandalism, or we can take this further and process formal charges." Karen glared at me over the officer's shoulder. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "I will leave," she said finally, her voice tight. As the police escorted her back to her house, one of them turned to me. "Document everything," he advised quietly. "If this continues, we will have cause for further action." I thanked him, watching as neighbors who had gathered to watch slowly returned to their homes. No one approached me. No one offered support or asked questions, but I had seen their expressions change as they witnessed Karen's performance and its unraveling. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time I had visible, irrefutable proof of what I had been enduring. Karen had finally overplayed her hand. I expected retaliation. What I did not expect was how quickly it would come or how institutional it would be. The letter arrived by certified mail 3 days after the confrontation. The envelope bore the official HOA letterhead, but the content was far from standard violation notices. This was a formal legal threat, citing me for aggressive surveillance, public defamation of a neighbor, and creating a hostile living environment. It stated that the board had received multiple complaints backed by witness statements. Unless I removed all security cameras facing toward community areas and signed a formal apology to Karen, they would pursue legal action for HOA covenant violations. The letter was signed by 3 board members, the president, vice president, and treasurer. The fine assessed was $2,000. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter in disbelief. This was not just Karen anymore. This was organized retaliation using the HOA as a weapon. I had anticipated pettiness, not institutional corruption. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. Miriam Chen arrived at my home the next day, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who reviewed my documentation with methodical precision. "You have been thorough," she noted approvingly, scrolling through my incident log and video archive. "This is exactly what we need." She paused at an image of Karen with an older man at a community picnic. "Who is this?" "The HOA vice president," I said. "Richard Westfield. He signed the letter." Miriam looked up sharply. "Westfield, same last name as Karen." That was when the pieces fell into place. A quick social media search confirmed what we suspected. Karen Westfield was Richard Westfield's niece. The connection had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. This explained the HOA's consistent dismissal of my complaints and their aggressive enforcement against me. "This changes everything," Miriam said, already drafting notes on her tablet. "We have a clear conflict of interest and abuse of power." We moved quickly. First, a restraining order against Karen, supported by the police report and video evidence of repeated trespassing and harassment. Second, cease and desist letters to Karen and the board members who had signed the threatening letter, citing their abuse of HOA authority for personal vendettas. Third, and most effective, I posted selected security footage online. I did not want to. Privacy had been my goal from the beginning, but Miriam convinced me that public pressure was necessary. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," she said. The footage went viral within the local community Facebook groups and next-door forums. Neighbors who had been passive or dismissive suddenly had opinions. Comments flooded in, predominantly in my support. Longtime residents revealed their own stories of HOA overreach and Karen's past behaviors. The narrative shifted dramatically. Within days, local news outlets picked up the story. A reporter contacted me for an interview about HOA abuse of power. Instead of appearing on camera, I provided my documentation and the public footage, letting the evidence speak for itself. Karen attempted to counter with her own social media campaign, portraying herself as the victim of technology misuse and neighbor bullying. But without her niece's institutional backing, her efforts fell flat. Every accusation she made was countered by video evidence showing the opposite. The HOA board called an emergency closed-door meeting. I was not invited, but Miriam insisted on attending as my legal representative. She returned with news that confirmed what we suspected. "They are in full panic mode," she reported. "Two board members who were not involved in the letter are demanding Richard Westfield's resignation for the conflict of interest. The president is trying to claim ignorance of the relationship, but evidence suggests he knew all along." The community that had once shunned me was now watching closely as the HOA leadership imploded under scrutiny. The power structure that Karen had manipulated was crumbling. "They will try to make this go away quietly," Miriam warned, "but we are not going to let them." She was right. The next day, a different letter arrived, offering to dismiss all fines against me if I would agree to remove the online footage and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Miriam laughed when she read it. "They still do not understand what this is about," she said. "This was never about money for you. It was about your right to peace in your own home." We declined their offer and countered with our own demands. A formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, Richard Westfield's resignation, and most importantly, a community vote to reform the HOA bylaws regarding surveillance, complaint procedures, and conflict of interest policies. The battle was no longer just about my pool or Karen's entitlement. It had expanded to address the corrupt system that had enabled her behavior in the first place. Power, when built on corruption, has a glass foundation. It shatters when enough pressure is applied to the right points. The first crack appeared when Richard Westfield resigned from the HOA board, citing personal reasons in his public statement. No mention of his niece, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but everyone knew. The second crack formed when board member Jennifer Long came to my door one evening. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "I knew what was happening was wrong, but Richard and Karen have been manipulating this neighborhood for years. People who speak against them suddenly find themselves drowning in violation notices or social ostracism. I invited her in, and over coffee, she revealed the extent of the nepotism and favoritism that had poisoned the HOA. Karen's family had been using their connections to punish neighbors they disliked and reward those who played along. The pool incident with me had been just one example of many boundary violations they had enabled over the years. Jennifer agreed to provide a formal statement to Miriam, detailing specific instances of abuse of power and procedural violations. Her courage inspired 2 other neighbors to come forward with similar accounts. Meanwhile, the online footage continued to circulate. The local news ran a follow-up piece titled HOA Corruption Exposed, featuring interviews with multiple residents who had experienced similar treatment. The story expanded beyond just my conflict with Karen to expose a system of neighborhood control that had operated unchecked for years. Under mounting public pressure, the HOA president resigned the following week. Karen, now without her institutional shield, attempted one last desperate move. She created an online fundraiser for her legal defense against privacy violations and neighbor harassment, portraying herself as a community advocate being persecuted. The backlash was swift and devastating. Former allies publicly distanced themselves. Comments on her fundraiser questioned her version of events and linked to the security footage. She raised only $47 before shutting it down. Miriam and I worked with the remaining HOA board members and concerned neighbors to draft new bylaws. We established clear procedures for filing complaints, required documentation for accusations, implemented conflict of interest disclosures, and created an appeals process for violation notices. Most importantly, we explicitly protected homeowners' rights to security measures on their own property. A community vote was scheduled. The turnout was unprecedented. Nearly 85% of homeowners participated, compared to the usual 20% for HOA elections. The reforms passed with overwhelming support. The neighborhood began to change. Not overnight, but gradually. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now stopped to chat. People introduced themselves when walking past my house. Someone left flowers on my porch with a card that read simply, "Thank you for standing up." Even those who had sided with Karen initially now acknowledged that the situation had revealed problems that needed addressing. One elderly neighbor confessed, "We just went along because it was easier. No one wanted to be the next target." That was the true victory, not just vindicating myself, but breaking the culture of fear that had allowed such behavior to flourish. People were talking to each other again, forming genuine connections instead of alliances based on protection. Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly isolated. The restraining order meant she had to actively avoid me, crossing the street when she saw me coming or waiting in her car if I was checking my mailbox. The neighborhood children no longer came to her house to play. Her allies had abandoned her. Her power base had evaporated. 3 weeks after the new bylaws were implemented, a "for sale" sign appeared in Karen's front yard. No one was surprised. The leaves began to turn as summer faded into autumn. The pool water grew too cool for swimming, but I still sat beside it in the evenings, watching the surface reflect the changing colors of the sky. For the first time since moving in, I felt truly at peace. Karen's house sold quickly, to a young family with 2 small children who approached me nervously the week after moving in. The father, a tall man with kind eyes, handed me a bottle of wine. "We heard about what happened," he said. "We wanted you to know that we respect boundaries and privacy. If our kid's ball ever lands in your yard, we will knock and ask permission before retrieving it." I smiled, appreciating the gesture more than they could know. "Thank you, and your kids are welcome to swim sometimes, if they have supervision and if you ask first." The surprise and gratitude on their faces reminded me that healthy boundaries create opportunities for genuine connection. Karen had never understood that concept. She had seen boundaries as obstacles to overcome, not as the foundation for mutual respect. I removed the extra locks from my gate. I kept the security cameras, not out of paranoia but as a sensible precaution. The no trespassing signs came down, replaced by a simple one that read, "Please respect privacy." The HOA continued under new leadership, a rotating committee of 5 members with term limits and transparent meeting minutes published online. The culture of secret decisions and selective enforcement had been replaced by clear procedures and accountability. One cool October morning, I received a letter postmarked from a neighboring town. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a 3-page letter from someone named Thomas, who had lived in our neighborhood years before I arrived. "I watched your story unfold on social media," he wrote. "7 years ago, the same family drove me out of the neighborhood through similar tactics when I objected to their children using my workshop without permission. I did not have the courage or resources to fight back as you did. Seeing justice finally prevail has brought me closure I did not know I needed. Thank you for standing firm where I could not." I read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing new perspective to what had transpired. What I had experienced had not been isolated or random. It had been part of a pattern of entitlement and control that had affected others before me. By refusing to surrender, I had not just protected my own peace, I had helped break a cycle that had harmed many. That evening, I floated in my pool one final time before closing it for the season. The water was cold, but I barely noticed. I gazed up at the stars, feeling the weight of the summer's conflict finally lifting from my shoulders. The fight had never really been about a pool. It had been about the right to define and defend your own boundaries, about standing firm when others try to take what you have worked for, about recognizing that peace sometimes requires confrontation before it can truly be achieved. I had moved to this neighborhood seeking tranquility after years of emotional turmoil. Instead, I had found a battle I never asked for. But in winning that battle, I had gained something more valuable than mere absence of conflict. I had earned respect from my neighbors, from the community, and most importantly, from myself. As autumn deepened into winter, the pool lay dormant under its cover. But I knew that when spring returned, I would enjoy it fully, not in isolation, but as part of a healthier community where boundaries were respected and connections were genuine. And if another Karen ever appeared on the horizon, I would be ready. Not with fear or anger, but with the calm confidence that comes from knowing exactly where your boundaries lie and having the resolve to defend them. Some lessons are worth the struggle it takes to learn them. Some peace is sweeter for having been fought for. And some battles change not just our own lives, but the lives of others in ways we may never fully know.